Okay, so today we're jumping into Chiploquorgan, which is this incredible 19th century adventure memoir. And it's so much more than just a story about hunting in the Canadian wilderness. It's really a tale of survival, of culture clash, and honestly, a surprisingly early warning about a world that was already starting to disappear. A warning that you'll see hits even harder today. So, right off the bat, what in the world is a Chiploquorgan? Well, it's a Milicite word, and it refers to the special stick they use to hang a kettle over the campfire. The title itself is brilliant because it pulls us right to the heart of the story, life by the fire, and even more importantly, the world of the indigenous guides who made this whole thing possible. So who's our guide on this adventure? Well, it's this guy, Captain Richard Lewis Dashwood. He's a British soldier, he's stationed out in New Brunswick, but he's not just there to follow orders. Dashwood has this deep, lifelong obsession with experiencing the legendary hunting and fishing of North America that he's only ever read about back in England. But here's the thing. His grand adventure doesn't exactly kick off with some heroic moment. Instead, he gets thrown into a series of really harsh and, frankly, pretty hilarious lessons about what the New World was actually like. Before he could even think about hunting, he had to survive just getting there. His journey starts with what has to be one of the worst boat trips ever. A 79-day voyage on a steamship called the Adelaide. I mean, look at this timeline. What was supposed to be a 2-week trip turned into a total mess. He says the engines, and I quote, broke down altogether about 10 times. They had to keep turning back, get repairs, before they finally limped across the Atlantic. And you'd think things would get better on land, right? Nope. This is where his fantastic dry British wit really starts to shine. He calls the stagecoaches the most wretched way to travel, mainly because the roads were basically just paths littered with giant boulders that made for an unbelievably awful ride. And all along the way, he's this keen observer of culture shock. He finds it kind of ridiculous how Americans give these grand, fancy names to everything. But he's also genuinely baffled by the social norms. Like when he sees all the hotel staff eating right there in the main dining room, something that would have been absolutely unthinkable back home in England. But the moment he finally cast his line into the water, wow, all the misery of the journey just paid off instantly. On one of his very first days fishing, he lands 63 big trout. This was it. This was the raw, untouched, abundant wilderness he'd been dreaming of. He also got a very quick and very itchy introduction to the real predator of the Canadian woods, the mosquito. And his solution, which you see here, is just a perfect example of gritty frontier life. It was a pretty gnarly mix of hog's lard and tar that you had to slather all over yourself every single hour. I can't imagine it smelled great, but hey, it worked. All right, so now we get to the real centerpiece of his story, the Great Moose Hunt. This was the ultimate test, the journey that was going to transform him from this curious tourist into a truly seasoned woodsman. It all began with what the locals called lugging, and trust me, it was as fun as it sounds. We're talking about hauling 80-pound packs through dense, pathless forest day after day. He calls it a most aggravating experience, just a pure test of your temper and will. And as a total newbie at this, Dashwood gives us some pretty funny descriptions of his own clumsiness. At one point, he falls off a log right into a stream, lands flat on his back with this huge pack, and is just stuck there, as helpless as a sheep, until his guides, laughing, come and pull him out. But it wasn't all just funny mishaps. This was seriously dangerous stuff. One night, while they were all fast asleep, this massive tree comes crashing down right across their camp. The only thing that saved him and his guide was a single log they'd put by the fire, which caught the trunk and stopped it from crushing them. So after weeks of this back-breaking work, and almost starving, he finally gets his chance. He manages to wound a massive bull moose. The final, tense tracking begins, and his guide, Noel, just calmly reassures him. He feel pretty bad. He not go far. And this quote, this just perfectly captures the absolute emotional peak of his entire trip. After his guide makes a call into the cold, silent night, he finally hears it, the deep, guttural response of a bull moose in the distance. And for Dashwood, that sound was far more sweet than that of any musical instrument. He describes this incredible moment when the moose finally appears in the twilight, this huge, dusky form stepping out into the open, and in that faint light, its massive antlers looked like the gnarled roots of a torn-up tree, just a truly ancient primordial sight. And then He takes his shot. He finally achieves the one goal that brought him all the way across the Atlantic. And you realize this was never just about sport for him. It was a profound test of his own endurance and patience, an achievement he earned through weeks of just unbelievable hardship. But here's where the story takes a really fascinating turn, because this isn't just some old-timey adventure diary. It's also this surprisingly modern look at a wilderness that he could see was already starting to disappear, even way back in the 1860s. He was not shy about criticizing the terrible mismanagement he saw. He completely calls out the corrupt fishery wardens, saying their jobs were just mere political jobs, and that the laws meant to protect the salmon were pretty much never enforced. What he was really seeing was this deep cultural clash. You had his British sporting idea of conservation on one side, and on the other you had the settlers, who saw nature as just this endless resource to make money from, where, as he puts it, the almighty dollar is always uppermost in their minds. So when you read between the lines of his hunting stories, what you really feel is this sense of sorrow. It's almost a lament for this pristine world that he could already see being scarred by industry, by greed, and by a total lack of foresight, like the senseless slaughter of moose just for their hides. And that really leaves us with this one big, kind of haunting question. Dashwood's warnings about exploiting our natural resources and losing wild places, they feel more relevant today than ever. It really makes you wonder, what would this man, who was mourning a vanishing world over 150 years ago, think if he could see it now?